Hi everyone, this is Craig Zelzer from PCDN based in Medellin, Colombia with Vladimira Briestenska, the co-founder of Neem, a serial entrepreneur, serial innovator, and changemaker. And we're here for season 10. I had a double check episode 16 of the Social Change Career Podcast. For people who have not joined us before, or if you don't remember, this is a live stream on LinkedIn and YouTube. We love to hear from people watching live. So feel free to share in the comments where you're watching from. And also please bring in your questions and comments as much as possible. So, feel free to share a sentence or two about your background now or throughout the session. And then this will be converted to an episode of our podcast, usually about a month afterwards, because we're a little behind between the live stream and the podcast. And the two requests, if you happen to be listening live or watching or listening later, is whether it's this podcast or any podcast, please take 30 seconds to rate it because it helps grow our impact. So if you're a podcast listener, we all do this as a labor of love. So, whatever platform you listen on, and then check out PCDN and Neem, and we'll talk much more about what Neem and Vladimir do. This generally lasts about 45, 50 minutes, and that's all you need to know for the intro. So today we're going to be talking about pivoting from human rights to working in the social impact startup space. So Vladimira is the co-founder of Neem, an embedded finance platform building financial wellness products for underbanked communities, including women in Pakistan, and hopefully going beyond. She's a recognized leader and global citizen living between Karachi, London, and Bratislava. She builds and invests into businesses with a strong purpose that challenge stigma and stereotypes. Amazing mission. She is also a co-founder of the global organization, The Future Farm, working a lot on mental health and entrepreneurship. And they also have a great podcast, which we'll talk about. Her experience includes working with pioneering fintech VC Anthemis in London, co-founding the first fintech startup accelerator in Slovakia, as well as spending over 3 years in the diplomacy and global public policy space. She's an angel investor and sits on the advisory boards of numerous impact businesses, including Noor, which is a mindfulness startup for the Arab world. So Vladimira, thank you so much for joining us today. And let me just welcome a few people here. So welcome Joseph from Malaysia, welcome Arun, let us know where you're watching from. And Vladimir, so how's the weather in Karachi? And thank you so much for joining us. And can you tell us a little bit about the type of change that you've been focusing on throughout your career?
Wonderful. Hi, Craig and everyone. Very excited to join your Impact series. I dial in from hot and humid Karachi. It's sort of our beautiful 5 p.m. afternoon. We are ending sort of our day. So this is a nice way to sort of do the closure. Impact and my approach to impact throughout my career. That's a broad question. And I think I've been certainly on a discovery path myself for the last, I would say, probably 10 to 12 years. We're going to talk about pivots in career, and there have been numerous in my journey. I think maybe just starting where it all started, or at the beginning. You mentioned when you were reading the bio that I have some experience from the policy sector. And indeed, when I sort of graduated from my bachelor's, I had this vision that I'm going to work on systemic change and be part of the glamorous public policy world. I hustled through it, and I was actually able to get a sort of taste and feel for it. So I was for a few years working in the European Parliament and at the heart of European Union, and also with a few other international organizations. And it's been awesome journey. But I think one of my major learnings from those early days of my career, I was also in my early 20s, was that I had very little of any understanding what was actually truly happening on the field and in people's lives, and for the businesses for which and for whom we were designing all those policies and regulations. So I think that was sort of the first moment on the career where I realized that even though I had this like high aspiration, which was driven by different sort of, I think, motivations and reasons, but I realized fairly quickly that it was not giving me sort of the I think, fulfillment on a daily basis of the work. So that was the first pivot in the career, and I looked around and I was trying to figure out how can I get more closer to what's actually truly happening for people. And I decided to embark on a degree of human rights. So that's sort of where I went deeper, because I felt like I need to surround myself by deeper understanding and people who've been around and doing some truly impactful things. And I've been very fortunate because I was able to enroll into a master's degree in human rights and democratization. And I would say the biggest benefit of that degree for me was being surrounded by a group of 100 people. There was sort of a rule to one person per country. So it was very diverse, you can imagine. And all of the people were required to already have a working experience. So I was surrounded by many people who've been working. Let's say there were people who came from field missions in Afghanistan. There were linguists, lawyers, public policy professionals, human rights activists. And we were all learning about how to apply a human rights lens on the diversity of professions that we came from. So that was really enriching experience for a year. And I think I figured out that my deep passion for especially women's rights was really there and something I wanted to work on. But I must say that one reflection, and maybe I'll pause there because I could go on and on the journey, but I think one learning from this year of studying human rights was that we've got the exposure to human rights professions, which are very much around the activism space and NGOs and the international organizations. But I feel there was very, very little of any exposure to entrepreneurship and the power that entrepreneurship has to drive impact. And that I only sort of discovered later in my journey, which we can talk about. But I think now with some time passing, that's my reflection, that I wish we would be talking and to other professionals and having a much more deeper exposure to entrepreneurship as a force of change.
And this was at the Global Campus for Human Rights. They used to have a different name, right? I think when you did it was called, I forget the exact name of the institution, but it's based in
the European Institute of Human Rights and Democratization in a very surreal place in the world, which is Venice in Italy. So it's been a wonderful experience.
So welcome. We have a couple more people. Welcome Fardeen from Turkey. And please let us know where you're watching from. So just one question about the policy career, then we'll switch into entrepreneurship. So you talked about the challenge, or let's say the potential frustration of working on interesting issues, but being distant from the real life impact, or at least the communities that those policies or programs were affecting. But for people who might want to work at the heart of European or global affairs, what skills did you find the most useful that you might have learned, in real life or in university? And for people who want to at least explore that area, any recommendations for people wanting to work more policy, human rights, international affairs?
Oh, sure, definitely. I mean, it is an exciting space. And I think if you are someone who really is sort of driven by the wider systemic change, I think this is a place where you might thrive, because you will get an exposure to really looking on some of the policies and regulations, and generally, I think the impact space from really bird perspective. I think it also, one thing to say is that the diversity of the roles that you can take, even at this level, is numerous. So I don't want to say that it is just only for one profile of sort of a person or sort of professional career. I mean, you can go anything from being an analyst, researcher that can sort of provide the groundwork for a lot of the policy. Then also you might be someone who is working very closely with the policymakers, which was my case. I was working directly with the member of the European Parliament. So there was an opportunity for me to really be part of many of the plenarium sessions and meet other sort of policymakers and see how that level of systemic change is sort of negotiated at the level that we usually don't have the opportunity to see. Maybe we see it at the TV or we read about it. I think maybe in terms of the skills, are probably versatile, but I would say it's someone. I would say research skills are certainly can come handy. I would say I would probably expect that you would be quite multilingual when it comes to being part of the sort of, at least in Europe, like the European sort of Union institutions, certainly for UN. I think you might be good at project management as well, because probably at the starting point, there would be a lot of project management work to support your units. And maybe overall, I would say come open-minded, because again, there is an opportunity, and I've seen it and experienced it myself, is that you might start at a certain point, which might be sort of, let's say, a policy analyst, but you can actually figure out if you are keen to work in this sector, you can figure out your way around it and explore different roles. I saw quite a lot of flexibility within the sector itself, and ability to network will come very handy. And I would say be proactive for sure, because that will enable you to open opportunities for yourself. So that's probably sort of my reflection on that sector.
Okay, thank you so much. So welcome Purva from India, Andre from Poland and Luxembourg. Again, feel free to share a sentence or two about your areas of interest or what you're working on in questions. Just one quick question for you. I mean, I lived in Central and Eastern Europe for many years, mostly Hungary, Czech Republic, Bosnia, a little bit in Western Europe. So Slovakia is a beautiful country. Are you from Bratislava or a smaller city? Then how many languages do you currently speak when you talk about multilingual?
Yeah, so I come from a very small town, about 2 hours drive from Bratislava towards the north part, so in beautiful sort of mountains area. And we have about 12,000 sort of inhabitants in the city. And I'm saying it specifically because here in Pakistan, whenever I mention that, people sort of feel that that's the size of one Pakistani wedding. So that's sort of, the joke that goes around. But I think it's also, just to share that you can sort of drive and you can come a long way, even though you come from a very small town anywhere in the world. And now I forgot the second part of your question.
I'm curious, how many languages do you currently speak reasonably well?
Yeah, so I think that's a tricky question, because being a part of the Slavic groups, you naturally, are able to speak Czech, understand Polish, a little bit towards Croatian. But I think it would probably be Slovak, Czech, English, solid German, a little bit of French, and now I'm learning Urdu. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't claim that I understand more than I speak, but it's on my list for this role is that I'll be fluent. So fingers crossed.
Awesome. So Purva's got a lot of experience working on child rights, and she's really appreciating what you're saying. So again, feel free to let us know a little bit about yourselves. So you had this kind of moment, and how in the world did you go from deciding to do another degree? You talked about it some, and then working with, I did my master's at Central European University back in the early years, and it was at that point it was almost all people from Central and Eastern Europe, and then they had 2 Westerners per program. So it was a life-changing experience too, because it was 94, so it was just really so being around a global community. I think if you're doing higher education, the more, if you're interested in these kind of issues, the more global the program, I think the better, both not just in terms of the study, but the student body and faculty. But how in the world how did you make this connection to entrepreneurship? So you talked about that you were surrounded by students from whatever, 80 to 100 countries, and you really were more focused on gender issues. But how did that transition go from hey, human rights is really interesting, but now did you meet a mentor? Did you attend a conference, read a book? Where did that, were you always interested in entrepreneurship and then you just decided to execute it, or where did that come from?
Yeah, I think, thank you for the question, because I think too often we talk about the end result and the career that we currently have, and very little we sort of unpack what was the path towards it. And for me, it wasn't straightforward. And I think it's actually for a lot of us, so you might resonate with that. So when I was doing my degree in human rights, I think even myself personally at that time, I felt that, okay, my place, I actually even trained with NATO as a gender advisor. So my path was in my mind in some post-conflict country as a gender advisor to the mission. But then life kicks in. So for me, life took me back to Central Eastern Europe, to my sort of, birthplace. And at that time, it was early days when the technology and startup ecosystem was just starting to thrive in Central Eastern Europe. So what happened is that number of my friends, so people I was spending my free time with, were part of the tech bubble and the entrepreneurship bubble. And I started to be really curious because they were inhibiting this enthusiasm, and it was very infectious. Their drive for change and creative, they were not afraid of failures. They were sort of this cool gang. And not to say that, you know, the public policy or, you know, deep human rights is not cool in any way. I don't want to say that. But I think one thing that resonated with me was that I was starting to understand that there is another pathway that started to really sort of ring my bells. And what I mean by that is that there was an opportunity for me to, at that point in time, to either go back to the European Union circles. And frankly, there was a brilliant career opportunity to become sort of a gender lead for Slovakia as the presidency in European Union, which seems so much like, of course, you take that journey. And the other option was to become part of this ecosystem, early stage entrepreneurship, Slovakia Tech. And I remember weighting those two options in my mind. And for most of the people in my close environment was like, of course, you take the Brussels opportunity. And I think it was in some way strong intuition, and also the fact that I was early days in my career, and I felt that if not now, when will I actually explore the other option, the other journey that somehow felt very exciting? And there was a lot of unknown. I think there was, if I compare the two at that time, and I clearly remember the sentiment, was that the opportunity within the public sector felt as something of climbing a ladder and something known. I somehow could sort of already see and put the puzzle together. And then in comparison, I had this completely unknown sort of opportunity in the space that I knew very little about. My parents come from engineering background. None of them are entrepreneurs. And I say yes to the second one, to the entrepreneurship. And I remember that excitement suddenly in my whole body. So sometimes I think what I want to say is that listen to your body as well. I think it will tell you which path to you sort of resonate with in that phase of your life, even though rationally for yourself and for a lot of people in your life, it might not make sense. I would say don't disqualify it. So I think sort of long story short, I said yes, jumped the cliff. And I soon realized, Craig, that actually entrepreneurship is not just about creating economic wealth for people and financial value, but I started to meet so many brilliant people who were very passionate about creating a big change around themselves in their communities. And the way they were doing it was by building solutions through using technology. And for me, that was wow. And I wanted to know and learn more about that space.
Awesome story. So I'm going to ask one follow-up questions, and other questions are coming in, but I just want to welcome Idrus from Yemen, Apim from Nigeria, Mariam, and thank you all for joining us. So just a quick story. So I've had had similar path in my life where I've had decisions that seem totally bizarre to people outside my circle. Like I had full funding to multiple PhD programs. I went to a place that gave me no funding because I wanted to focus on practice. You know, I had a prestigious job in academia. I quit it to focus on my startup. Like I moved to and making those kind of life decisions are really hard. And so often it does come down to intuition. I've personally found there's an app I've actually used multiple times on rank order decision making, where I do the journaling, the meditation, drive everybody crazy, you know, drive myself crazy. And then somehow like looking at this data and the intuition has been really helpful for making these decisions that just seem like, why would anybody do this? But I just knew I had to do it. Like, you know, so any other thoughts on your decision-making process or recommendations for others? I mean, we all need to pay the bills. So not everybody is fortunate to have multiple options, but if you're fortunate to be able to choose, any other thoughts, like what does it mean to listen to your intuition, or how do you get to that point, or your recommendations for others when these really big life, let's not talk about like marriage or like buying a house, but like professional decisions.
Yeah. I think there's a pathway for in that decision-making process, and multiple steps. So I love mind maps. Like I'm a quite a structured person. So what I love to do when I embark on a question, right, or a decision that I make, and let's say now applied in the sort of career professional growth, I take these big papers or a wall and I draw things out. Like I put it from the head on the paper so I can see it, so I can apply the bird perspective. Now there are awesome tools as well that you can use, like Miro, and you can actually start moving the puzzle around. So I usually do at the initial steps, initial stages of the decision making process. That's what I do. Like I put that mess and chaos from my head on the paper or on some sort of a tool. And then I try to see some patterns, but also what I try to identify are some of the most important critical factors for me. How do I drive my decisions? So for instance, I remember at one point in my career, when I was sort of navigating a pivot, I started thinking about like, okay, for me, it's less important how does the actual role title looks like at the end of the story, but it was for me, it was important that I can travel globally, that I have let's say financial freedom, right? So I was prioritizing, let's say, the financial freedom over other things. It was important for me to work within the social impact space. So defining some of those which are more sort of generic criteria, but they're quite tailored to your own personal preferences, was quite critical, because then I started sort of moving around and filtering the chaos, right? So that was sort of the first step. I think two more things that I want to maybe emphasize before we come to the intuition is that I try to also look for people who are already on the journey of some of the professions that I aspire towards. So let's say when we are speaking about being a fintech impact founder, I look up those people, and maybe even more closely in different geographies. If I'm personally interested in emerging markets, I contact those people, whether that's via LinkedIn or ask my friends, and then I have conversations with those people. How it is, what are you doing? Like, get into the nitty gritty of the daily life within that profession. I think that can be very helpful, because often, and this is what I learned before I entered the public sector at the early stage of my career, that I had some sort of a glamorous idea, but only later when you are in the profession, you realize what it really entails. So if you can doing a little bit of prototyping and MVP through conversations with people who are already in it, I think that can be very, very helpful. And then maybe a last one is I do give quite a lot of value to view of people in my close circle, but I'm really speaking about close circle, which doesn't need to mean your parents or, the sort of the stereotypical closest circle. I'm speaking about people who you believe truly knows you. And I give value to their perspective on what do they believe might tick for me. And I bring all of those insights then together. And I think that's where the intuition then kicks in. So it's not like I just look at something and intuition tells me. There is a little bit of sort of the groundwork, but then I bring it all in and go into space of calmness, some sort of a mindfulness. And I think the answer within, at least I do most of the time.
Good. Thanks for sharing that. I mean, it can be terrifying. So I think just acknowledging, like, doing things, whether you stay the safe path or the risky path, those are hard decisions. I mean, thankfully they don't come up every day, but so I'd encourage you to even write some on that. So I'm going to bring in a few questions. So Joseph has a very specific question to his experience. So what would you ask for someone from Myanmar seeking to join their studies in Malaysia? So I'm going to broaden that out a little bit, Joseph. Thank you for your question. And we know things are very difficult in Myanmar. So, Pakistan has had lots of Afghani displaced, and Pakistan has a lot of challenges. So do you have any recommendations in general for people who might have had to move because of natural disasters or conflict who want to continue their studies somewhere else?
Yeah, and thank you, Joseph, for your questions, and thank you for tuning in. I did or have came across a number of people who were sort of facing a similar question or challenge in their life in a way. What I sort of, when I look back, what I feel worked for them was actually try to identify other people. So in this case, it was other Pakistanis who were already studying in abroad in other countries, and have conversation with those folks in terms of what it took for them to identify, let's say, some grants opportunities, because a lot of Pakistanis studying abroad really went for sort of funding and grants, what it takes in terms of the visa. I mean, I think overall what I'm trying to say is that identifying people who might have come through a similar journey already and they might relate to your sort of situation might be the most helpful, because otherwise I feel like often people might give and provide advices which might be even harmful or not really useful to you. So that's probably what I would try to sort of look for. I mean, in your case, probably I would look for some communities within Myanmar, whether they're within Malaysia, whether there are people from Myanmar or similar communities that sort of went through that journey. I know that universities often also provide and help with those introductions. So maybe contacting some of the student sort of buddies in the universities that you are looking for, that might be also helpful.
Thank you so much. So Joseph, just a few comments I was putting in. So University of People, is an online university that provides a lot of access. Open Society Foundations often has specific funding for populations affected. Again, you'd have to look at their specific programs. International Institute for Education. And as Vladimira said, peer networks, whether it's organizations working with people displaced or who had to leave Myanmar, or just other populations. And then, some countries also look at government. I mean, NGOs are always a great resource, both local and international. And then also look, sometimes universities themselves, I mean, they're very bureaucratic, but you might be able to, some universities, there's an increasing movement because so many people are displaced by conflict and disaster. So there's one program called Scholars at Risk, which is more for PhD level, but there's a lot to academics who are at risk or have to move often help. And there's also some movement around students. So, and there's a Jesuit refugee services. There's some great organizations that are doing programming to help people who are displaced to get access to higher education. So feel free to ask more questions. So Mariam, who's based in Pakistan, is a human rights educator. Thank you. Welcome, Mariam. Asks, how do you bring feminist-centered and collective care approach to your work?
Wow, brilliant question. Thank you for that. So maybe, I mean, it's a time to deep dive a little bit into what we are doing at NEEM, and I'll try to sort of answer that question there. So NEEM is, in a nutshell, a technology company, financial technology company, and our mission is to sort of enable what we call financial wellness, which is really more holistic financial resilience and financial health for people who've been traditionally excluded from the financial sector, so from the traditional banks. And of course, big part or proportion of these underrepresented communities are women. It is not just in Pakistan, but really globally. Just to maybe share the scale of what it means in terms of Pakistan when we're talking about underbanked and unbanked population. So it is approximately over 120 million people and about 3.3 million small and medium businesses. So the scale is really massive. So I think that's another reason why I always felt really sort of in need and passionate to sort of contribute, even if a little bit, right? So how we are trying to bring in, I mean, we are early days in terms of bringing the, I would say, gender lens in our work, but the intent has been there since day zero. It really comes in number of sort of approaches. One is that we are looking, or we are starting to look on how we sort of design our products and offerings, right? So our sort of approach to market is a little bit different than most of the financial inclusion or financial wellness companies, because you would be probably more familiar with the business to consumer apps, which you can sort of come across through easy marketing, and you can directly face the branding of that solution. We are B2B2C platform. I will just cover that by one sentence. What that means is that our technology actually empowers other businesses and brands across diverse sectors, whether that's agriculture, healthcare, mobility, food industry, you name it. And we empower those platforms to be able to provide financial wellness products to their end users. So the gender lens again comes in the product design. We are trying to work with our digital platforms partners, the other businesses and brands, in designing the products in a way that actually reflects the needs of women communities. What that means is obviously we are trying to understand those needs of women. And also when I say women communities, I mean, let me just say, it is such a diverse spectrum. And I think that's one of the humbling experiences for me and learnings in Pakistan, is that from really early days, I sort of understood that even Pakistan in itself sort of embraces such diversity. And when we talk about ethnicity, religions, when we talk about sort of the needs of people living in the city areas and rural areas, so all of that comes sort of in we are trying to understand when we are designing the product. I think the other part that it's sort of goes hand in hand is that we are very aware that we can't represent or build sort of gender focused products or sort of friendly products, gender friendly products with gender lens, if our team is fully sort of represented by men. And I mean that even in the diversity of their identities and experiences still. So we are trying to do as much as possible to really attract women talent, especially in the tech and product sectors, to work with our team. We've been successful to some level. We're still on a lookout, doing a lot of efforts. So engaging with the local communities that are already working with women talent, and they're sort of also communities that are focused on education around product and tech and focusing on women. So we are engaging with them and trying to sort of help and mentor the talent early on their journey, because only then we can truly say that yes, we have people who can go and actually even interact with those women communities. Because often you would embark on the social and cultural barriers where, let's say, if I send my product manager who is a man into a certain community, he naturally cannot even engage with women customers, right? So I think maybe just to start with, those are the two. One is to try to understand by deep research, engaging into understanding the landscape and the needs of our women customers and represent that in the product design. And second is really bring in the women talent inside of the company.
Wonderful. Thanks, Miriam, for the question. So 2 follow-up questions, then we have some more that have come in. So how in the world did you go from, let's say, the startup ecosystem in Slovakia to launching multiple companies and initiatives, and why Karachi, why financial wellness? Like, was this germinating? It was your co-founders?
Yeah, thank you, Craig. So we ended in the Central Eastern Europe, right? That's where I pivot. And I think for the sort of following probably 3 to 4 years, I decided to work alongside entrepreneurs. So what that meant is that I was learning from the experience of others, how they were building their businesses, and I was trying to do my best in supporting them on that journey. I did that in Central Eastern Europe, where we founded the first startup accelerator. And then my journey brought me to, again, more global perspective. So I was working with Anthemis, which is this really premier fintech venture fund. And Anthemis has been at the time investing globally into fintech entrepreneurs. And most of them have been purpose-driven fintech solutions and founders. So my role was to help them on that business journey, but more from my ability to understand what some of the struggles and challenges they're facing, and then being able to link them and connect them with the right people to help them solve that challenge, because that was the skill I had. Whilst I was doing that, it gave me a beautiful sort of landscape to really deep dive into two things, or maybe three. One was my love for emerging markets. I rediscovered it. I think I first discovered it in the human rights degree when I was surrounded by people from a really global perspective and a lot of people from frontier emerging markets. And second time now, when I was practically traveling and supporting those founders who were actually implementing their solutions and building in emerging markets. And I felt that that's the place where I belong. It was really, again, we coming back to the intuition. I felt it was sticking with me. And I think it was also that feeling that when I was working in London, I somehow felt that the founders were overfloated with support. And whenever I came to places like, at that time it was Accra in Ghana or Nairobi in Kenya, and I felt that those ecosystems were so undervalued and underseen, and there was so very little of support at the time. It's a little different today, but I think that's what I felt in Pakistan equally a few years after. So I rediscovered my love for emerging markets, but I also had the opportunity to actually go deeper into understanding financial wellness. Given that I never came from financial services background, I always carried that with me, and I always thought that it was a little bit of imposter syndrome, to be honest, which means sort of having a self-doubt or not feeling good enough for being around the table. And I think I felt that, in order to build a financial technology business, you have to have a financial services degree. Well, it's a myth. So if you ever carry that myth, let me tell you that it is not true. I rediscovered financial wellness, and I had the opportunity to sort of deep dive, try to understand, research, have a conversation with people in terms of what this means for them, why they're building the solution. And I realized that I also somehow connected it back to my own sort of life path, which was that which I wasn't aware of, but early days back home in Slovakia, I realized that I was able to observe that my mom wasn't financially literate, and she wasn't also financially empowered. And many years after, when I was working on this financial wellness sort of theme and really thesis, I was able to connect the dots and actually see practically that when you sort of enable people with access and education and literacy to proper financial products and services, it goes much more beyond. You actually truly are empowering their choices in life. You're bringing dignity to them. You are working on their independence, self-sufficiency, which ultimately then sort of reflects in their whole life for themselves, for their families, for communities, for nation at large. So I think that's where, Craig, whilst working alongside those entrepreneurs, I developed my own passion and curiosity and I think purpose within that space. So when Pakistan came around, which was truly, I would say, serendipity, but also it came in the time when I was ready, I believe. I was ready for embarking on this true emerging markets opportunity. And it was one of my co-founders, Nadeem, who is also my life partner right now. So life has its way. But he gave me a call because he got this opportunity in Pakistan. And he said, would you be open to come to Pakistan, even though you never worked here? There's an opportunity to work on a financial wellness business. At that time, it wasn't our own business. It was an opportunity to work with another business. Would you want to learn about the country and work on this mission? And I said, yes. So that took about a year. And after a year, we realized that the need is massive. We are super passionate about this space. We met our third co-founder and we shook hands and said, okay, let's build Neem. And this was about 5 years ago, to be precise.
Awesome. Yeah, I also work with Catalina, my life partner. It's a whole nother podcast. People whether it's a nonprofit or anything, lots of opportunities and challenges. So And I also do a lot in financial wellness. I mean, not at so much the bottom or, the pyramid, whatever expression, but I've come, I teach on this at Georgetown, and, I do workshops, and I've come to the conclusion that so many of the people I know in the impact space, not generally people in the financial sector, don't take the time to explore where they park, save, and invest their money. I mean, they might be financially savvy, and one, they don't think about, I don't want to say general, but I'd say about 98% of the people I interact with don't think about where their money's parked in terms of they're working for social impact, but they don't look at the banking or investing. And so much of where we choose to invest our capital is destroying the planet. So me, and then also the second thing is a lot of places charge, for the ones that are supposedly socially responsible, charge very high fees for crappy products. So anyway, people get in touch with that, but it's a real challenge. And so it's something that I think, and a lot of my students also don't have that awareness. Some do, some are much smarter than I am and have gone to work in impact and venture. But it's really, if you're working in social impact and you have any excess capital, whether it's $1 or euro, whatever currency, and you have 5 minutes, like just thinking about where you choose to put your money can have such big implications. And there was a report that came out last year. I don't remember the title, but it basically looked at the big tech companies, where they choose to put their money has such a big impact on the climate, if it's in banks that are lending. So it's just like, even as a little investor, you can have some impact. So anyway, so I'm going to go back to Mariam has a really good question, again, related to studies. So any tips on someone who wants to pursue human rights further education? So, whether it's Global Campus for Human Rights, I recommend, PCDN is a great resource. Pro Fellow is wonderful. And all the major fellowship places like the Chevening, the Fulbright, the DAD, all those places. But any recommendations from your own experience or your networks?
I think to be very honest, Mariam, you embarked on the expert, which is Craig, not so much myself. So he's this, full breadth of experience and resources. I think frankly, like on the top, Craig, of what you said, which are some specific communities, I think I just want to highlight the same point that I was trying to make before on the question around sort of embarking onto studying in Malaysia, which is that I would try to look for people who are sort of active in the human rights spaces, and let's say people like myself. Like if you see on my CV, on my LinkedIn, that I studied in the human rights or I have the human rights degree, send me a message. I think LinkedIn and those technology platforms, networking platforms, are smart, that they will start recommending other people within similar areas. When you and I will have a conversation, I will think about 5 other people that I will connect you to. So I think from my personal journey, I can't stress enough how much the network, and I think it's also the boldness and courage to reach out to people as a cold calling, which often we sort of neglect and we feel intimidated by. It can bring a wonderful value for you. So I think that's the point I want to emphasize, Maria, that see who do you know already, ask them for introductions, and they will introduce you to other layers of people in that space. And they will have, I'm sure, a bunch of useful sort of tips and resources for you, or things at least that will sort of guide you in a certain way that you can then decide for yourself whether that's useful or not.
Okay. I would just add one comment. If you're doing cold outreach, do your research. Don't just say, help me get a scholarship, because all of us are inundated. Do a little bit of research. And then again, I'll put in another plug. Central European University, unfortunately, because of human rights challenges or closed government space in Hungary, they moved everything to Austria after 25 years. But it's a truly global, world-class university, and they do have a lot of good policy and rights and gender. Well, Hungary, they canceled gender studies. I think they have it again in Austria, but they have a lot of funding and a truly global audience. And then one other tip is, anytime you're looking for funding, you got to start at least a year in advance. Like a lot of people wait till a couple of months before the deadline. So, a question around hiring. So whether it's at NEAM or elsewhere, can you talk a little bit about when you've hired or are hiring? And I assume most of the people you're hiring are based in Pakistan. Do you have global talent? But like when you do a job opening, if it's publicly posted, like how many applications do you get? And whether it's for a product role or marketing, then how do you filter down to the top candidates? And then so a little on the process, but then any recommendations for job seekers about how to potentially be more competitive, or at least let a founder or someone hiring know why they might be the best person.
Got it. So yes, we hire in. We are actually now hiring much more because we are growing as a company. Most of our talent is based in Pakistan. Our tech team majority sits in Sri Lanka. However, we are sort of growing our tech team in Pakistan these days as well. I think the number of applications sort of depends based on the role, to be honest. I mean, when it comes to the product talent, the pool yet and the experience of of sort of the ecosystem in Pakistan is not as mature. Let's say when we, for instance, are hiring for a marketing manager or partnerships manager, sort of similar applies for, let's say, product designers and designers in general, right? That's sort of a less, I would say, experienced, mature talent here, but it's also changing. So that's just a little bit of that. It depends on the role. I think if I would sort of suggest a few things, one thing is that for us, from a perspective of Neem, we are, I would say, very clear about our values as a company. We invested a lot of time in trying to really decode them. And we use them also as one of the key filters for what talent do we bring into the company and into the team. So our hiring process takes a while. Our retention is brilliant. So we so far have, had sort of maximum 2 people, I think 1.5 to sort of let go and for their personal reasons. But so what I want to say by that is that what this means for the candidate, I would say, maybe it's a no-brainer thing, but I still would like to emphasize this, is that study the company. Like, do your research. Like, sometimes it sort of happens to me, and this is at the founder level interview, that I ask people about why are you driven and excited to work for Neem and our vision. And often people are confused still about what Neem does, and they're unclear. And that's a turnoff, massive turnoff for us, because we are looking for people who are, yes, have skills and experience in the role that we're hiring for. But to be honest, like, I would say the one eligibility criteria is that you are truly passionate about our space. You might be not as knowledgeable of the space, but you're curious, you're passionate. That's the excitement needs to come through. Even today, I mean, we just had one interview and it was a brilliant candidate from expertise perspective. It was a woman, which I really wanted a woman for the role. But just generally her excitement for the space and for the vision was not there. And my team said, we don't want that. Like, we don't want to opt for the skills at the cost of really the drive for the passion. So that's in the Neem case. So I would say study the company, make sure you understand the values. If they publicize them on the website, try to understand the story of the founders. I'm sure there are some articles, maybe podcasts. Do listen, do a little bit of your work. It will be appreciated, and it will take you a longer way because it shows in the conversations.
Wonderful. So we have a few more minutes. So a follow-up question: can you share a little bit? So what is it like to? I mean, obviously, I live in Colombia. It's got a lot of it's very hot for Latin American startups and ecosystem, but also has huge amounts of challenges, like millions of displaced and Venezuelans, and economic challenges and violence. So what is it like to be building a startup? And I don't want to generalize Pakistan, but it's a huge country, incredibly rich history, but also lots of, apart from the floods recently, which were hugely impactful, and Karachi is one of the biggest cities in the world. Like, what is it like to be building a startup, obviously with Pakistani co-founders, in such a dynamic market, but also has so many challenges?
Yeah. We've had a conversation with an investor from Silicon Valley I think it was about a month ago. And the investor, because it was sort of a safe space, good conversation, vulnerable. And he was sharing that they sort of have this roller coaster, like every month they go up and down. And we sort of smiled with Nadine, with my co-founder, and we said, well, we sort of have a roller coaster every day, you know, like hour by hour. So I think that's maybe a quick summary of the answer, is that there's never a down moment. That's one sort of perspective. There is, I think, our muscle of resilience that we have built over the course of the last few years is enormous. And I think that's where you have to make the investment, because the level of ambiguity that is around you and the factors that are out of your control is huge. And so I would suggest to anyone who is interested in working in emerging markets or in countries like Pakistan, is that be ready to really, really embrace your sort of resilience to maximum. I will give some examples and then maybe come sort of reflect again from a bird perspective, but some concrete examples, like, for instance, fundraising process for tech founders in emerging markets in Pakistan. Few nuances. You have to massively educate investors. Like, what, for instance, if we would be fundraising in London or New York, we would be focusing in conversations about our business. In this case, 2/3 of the conversations we focus on educating investor about the market and why they should invest in Pakistan. So that was a nuance that was new to me. Second part is that get ready to hear a lot of no's, and I mean a lot. My current CRM, a database of investors, have over 700 investors. I remember when I talked to a friend of mine who has been raising in Silicon Valley, and I had about sort of 50 investors in my database, and I said to him, like, what's happening? I'm getting those no's, and I already have 50 investors. And he raised in emerging markets before, and he said to me, if you don't have 300 plus investors in your CRM, don't talk to me. And I think that's what I learned over the course, is that you will just have to be ready for much bigger scale of the hustle that you have to go through. The other part is that it's just a beautifully rewarding experience. Whether that means working with the team that is so hungry for sort of the work, and they show up every day to work ready to embark on the challenge. It's rewarding in the sense of seeing the impact that you create for people that truly impacts their lives. So I think that's the other sort of side of the coin. So be ready for the hard work, because it's hard work. But then I think the reward in terms of bringing your mission and purpose to reality will be there. It will be the strong driver. So that's what it comes with, hand in hand.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Can you talk a little bit about Future Farm and your podcasts, and also for people who want to engage, whether it's Future Farm or Neem, like just what type of, could it be rating the podcast, or you're looking for investors in Neem, or just like a little bit like how can people help you who might be watching this or listening in the future?
So maybe let me mention a little bit the Future Farm and our podcast. So as I was working alongside entrepreneurs for many years, I realized that in the conversation I was having, it was a lot of focus on the business, and it was about how do we crack the marketing and fundraising and etc., you name it. However, most of the conversations, even though the support was focused on the business, most of the conversations were actually very vulnerable, and they were about their individual experience. And I was realizing that the individual experience of the founders and entrepreneurs is actually quite harsh, and their willingness to sort of share with others was very small, because they felt that it might be used as a negative on their, let's say, fundraising journey. Or, when you read all those Forbes or TechCrunch articles, very little we read about the journey and the cracks of it, and how hard it is, and what it takes to maintain your mental and emotional health and well-being. We read about the successes, right? And that even more sort of supports this imposter syndrome or anxiety, and I think the need to cover up. So when I embarked on that, and even more so now in my personal journey as a founder, I realized that it is so important for us to actually normalize this and say it is very okay, and yes, it's part of the journey to also have a bad days and to not have the answers and to struggle with our mental health and emotional health. So what we are trying to do in Future Farm is very much that. We are trying to open a conversation. So our project is a podcast that is called Naked by the Future Farm, and it really means to have a naked, vulnerable conversations with entrepreneurs from around the world. And we talk about their personal stories about the mental and emotional health. And we also talk about not just the dark side, but we very much focus also on the supporting mechanisms. So how do those entrepreneurs support themselves as they're going through those through this roller coaster, really? So I would certainly encourage people and all of you out there to check it out, whether that's on Spotify or YouTube or Apple Podcast. Just type Naked by the Future Farm and enjoy. And maybe if you have a story on your own that you would like to share, or you know about another entrepreneur that went through such sort of emotional and mental health struggles and is ready to share their stories, do reach out to me. I would be very, very happy to hear and then create the safe space for sharing that story. So that's on the Future Farm and Naked side. When it comes to Neem, I would say if you're in Pakistan, certainly let's talk. If you are passionate about the financial wellness space and you want to embark on the sort of startup and impact tech space, I'm happy to connect you to my sort of colleagues and figure out whether there is something for you in our team. We are currently fundraising, so if we have any investors currently listening, or you know about anyone which is a angel investor or a family office or VC that is interesting or curious about Pakistan and a strong impact tech venture, then do connect them with myself, and I'll take it from there. I think that's probably the two most important at the moment. One is the talent, and second is the capital.
So we'll finish in 2 minutes. So as working in many sectors, I've had depression and frustrations and anxiety and imposter syndrome. And I think having that community and, whether it's therapy, meditation, like so many people I know struggle with it, but they don't talk about it. And I do have to say, I don't know Alexis Ohanian personally, just connected on LinkedIn, but within 776, they're the foundation that's doing great environmental work. And then the fund, they actually build in, I think, 1% of their funding for like wellness and coaching, their investments, and something like that. So I'm saying, so it's so important because there's so much burnout. So last two questions. One is, what are you doing personally around, it could be nothing related to work, but are you upskilling, reading a fun book, watching a fun show, anything that just is inspiring you or occupying your brain in a good way?
Oh, definitely. So I am an avid podcast listener. I realize that that's the way I consume new insights and learnings to the level that I also then identify the people behind, whether those are the guests. I mean, most of the time it's the guests, and I often reach out to them. And often I also get no response whatsoever. But in few cases, I was able to connect with the people, and it actually led to a wonderful conversations. And sort of we'll see what the future embarks. But few of those podcasts, maybe just to share one, which is sort of focused on more lifestyle and well-being in general, reflecting on the very fast-paced sort of times that we are living in, is a podcast of a brilliant host called Rich Roll. And the podcast is called Rich Roll as the name of the host. Maybe I can even share it. I don't know if you can, maybe Craig, if you Google it. But the Rich Roll podcast is one I would certainly recommend, because he brings sort of on board on his show really diverse set of experts, but also people who share their life stories. And it goes from anything about sort of conversation about aging and the lifespan, towards mental health, towards going deeper into personal growth. And those are topics that I really sort of enjoy and I think also thrive on. And maybe then for people who are passionate about the fintech impact space, I would certainly recommend Fintech Leaders podcast. It's a weekly podcast that brings on sort of operators and founders who are building fintech purpose businesses across mostly emerging markets, and it's sort of my daily bread. And that's the one where I even connected with a number of those founders, and it's a great source of sort of inspiration. So those are probably the two. Other than that, to be honest, Craig, I'm trying to now venture out a little bit more into fiction, because I've been sort of reader of everything personal growth, and sometimes you can also overdone it. So now I'm looking for some good sci-fi books and stuff unrelated to personal growth. So if you have any tips, please do message me. And yeah, that's what I love.
Thank you.
Now.
And then last question, what networks or other resources do you find, rest of the world's a great resource on tech in the whatever global south or whatever you want to call, but any other like networks, conferences, publications, or just anywhere else you go for community inspiration or just industry knowledge?
Yeah, I must say that I think, and I sort of learned this more in Pakistan, because Pakistan is really heavy on LinkedIn. I know, again, it's like one of the more obvious ones, but even within sort of the past few years, I realized the power of LinkedIn. And I started really sort of connecting in LinkedIn via more proactive search. So not only sort of, when I was in Europe, it was more of on the passive side, and I was just accepting invitations and stuff. What I'm doing right now, I'm actually pretty actively searching people and sort of groups and communities within the areas that interest me and are relevant for me. And then I reach out to those folks. So I think that's the one that I would like to maybe stress, because otherwise I know that there are many others, and sometimes it feels like maybe even overwhelming. So yeah, I think for me, primarily networking source right now that I go to, whether that's for impact or fintech or entrepreneurship and mental health, is very much LinkedIn professionals.
Okay, thank you so much for taking an hour out of your day or end of your day, and for sharing your wisdom and energy and decision-making insights and so much more. And I hope, and I know you do, and everybody hopefully listening, that Neem scales both in terms of revenue, but more importantly, impact, both in Pakistan and beyond. And we need so much more financial wellness, because I do think, as you've said, we need good policy, good governance, democracy, but it's also financial wellness helps contribute to all those things. And it's so important. Please check out Neem. Please check out the Future Farm. And I love the title of the podcast. Check out PCDN. And again, whether it's this podcast or any other, please take 30 seconds to rate it. And thank you, everyone, for listening live or listening in the future. And thank you so much again, Vladimira.
Thank you so much, Craig, for having me and for giving me the opportunity to also share my learnings. Again, thank you.
Okay.